As you all know, Britain just had a general election not too long ago. They elected Keir Starmer as their new Prime Minister. However, what surprised many observers in other countries was just how quickly he became Prime Minister. Within 12 hours of the exit polls, projecting a Labour landslide majority government, Keir Starmer had already visited King Charles and had been appointed the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And to add on to that, the new Parliament met within 5 days of the election win. Basically, things moved very quickly in Britain. So for me as a Canadian, I found this interesting, as our political system is supposed to be based off of the British Westminster parliamentary system. As I did more and more research and learned more, I found out that there are quite a few differences between Canada's parliamentary system versus the original one used in Britain. Let's look at differences between the two political systems.
Swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors. So help me God.
A difference between the two systems is the oath-taking. In Canada, our Prime Minister and their cabinet take their oaths or affirmations in front of the Governor-General at Rideau Hall, where they promise to be faithful to the King of Canada in both French and English. In case you didn't know, the difference between an oath and an affirmation is that an oath includes a reference to God, whereas an affirmation does not. Members who take an oath get a choice of a holy book to swear with. Regular MPs take their oaths in private ceremonies where they can choose who is there. These are not often videotaped, and the MP just swears a similar oath privately in the clerk's office. In both cases afterwards, the new politician signs the roll and boom, they're actually officially whatever they swore their oath to be. In the UK, this is entirely flipped. All MPs make videotaped, semi-public oaths to the King of the UK, which also happens to be the King of Canada, on the floor of the House of Commons. They are asked whether they want to do an oath or an affirmation, and if they choose to do an oath, they will select a holy book to do their oath on. However, there's no recorded or viewed inauguration of the Prime Minister. Basically, the old Prime Minister goes to the King to resign, and not long after, a new person goes to the palace, talks to the King, and walks out having magically transformed into the British Prime Minister. Another big difference is that in the UK, the Prime Minister in Canada kind of gets sworn in a bunch of tiny meetings with the King as they're appointed, whereas in Canada, the Cabinet and Prime Minister are all sworn in together at one big ceremony. Canadian political parties can be seen as more dictatorial in some ways, but also more democratic than British parties in other aspects. In Canada, party leaders hold significant power, often stifling dissent by threatening to remove MPs who speak against them. While some parties allow caucus votes before ejecting an MP, others do not. In contrast, in the UK, there's more room for dissent, with MPs potentially losing the whip for voting against key policies, though this is used sparingly and procedurally rather than at the whim of party leadership. One key difference is the longevity of governing party leaders. For example, the UK Conservative Party had 5 leaders over 14 years in government, whereas the Canadian Conservatives only had 1 leader in 8 years. Opposition leaders' tenure varies in both countries, though the UK tends to change leaders more frequently after election losses. In terms of party leadership elections, Canada is slightly more democratic, as party members rather than the caucus decide the leader, though some parties require payment to vote. In the UK, Labour allows members to choose from among MPs, while the Tories have the MPs within the caucus narrow down the candidates to only 2 candidates before a membership vote. Another key difference is that in the UK, MPs are the only candidates eligible for party leadership. In Canada, any party member can in theory serve as party leader, and then seek a seat in the House of Commons at their earliest possible opportunity. Look at the current leaders of the NDP and Bloc Québécois, who both became leaders with no seat in the House of Commons. Jagmeet won a seat in the by-election, whereas Blanchet won a seat in the general election after him becoming leader. In Canada, as a reflection of all of us, except me, being neat and organized people, we have a set, publicly accessible seating plan in the House of Commons. Our MPs have a specified seat that is theirs, and when they come to the House, they sit in their spot. The Prime Minister sits near the middle, and straight across from them is the Leader of the Opposition. The government sits on the Speaker's right, and the opposition sits on the Speaker's left. Members of other parties fill the seats as necessary on both the left and the right. In Britain, there's not even enough room for all of the MPs. There just isn't enough space for everyone to sit. And in all honesty, it works just fine, except for the times when MPs have to find places to uncomfortably stand at this opening of Parliament or in a resignation speech or something. First come, first serve. In Canada, we have 10 provinces, which are promised powers by our constitution. To remove powers from our province, the federal government would need to pass a constitutional amendment, with 2/3 of the provinces agreeing to remove their own powers. Technically, the federal government has the ability to veto any provincial law, but given that they haven't done this since the 1930s, I doubt this counts very much. In the UK, they have 4 nations within their nation. They have England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland all have their own devolved parliaments, with powers granted to them by the central government in London. The UK is a unitary state, but they have granted powers to the 3 nations who can make decisions for themselves in some areas. England doesn't have its own parliament, and instead laws are made for them by the central government. Theoretically, if they wanted, the UK could revoke the devolution system and take back all of their powers that they have reserved for the local governments. But doing so would definitely spark controversy and Scottish separatism and Welsh separatism and Irish unionism, so they might as well just not. All in all, it is clear where Canada's political system is inspired from. The systems might be different in some ways, but at the end of the day, they're similar in more ways than different. But what do you think? Are we more similar or different? Let me know in the comments. But apart from that, have a good rest of your day and see you.